Hi, and welcome to From the Start, a parent's guide to talking about racial bias, our live event created in partnership with Johnson's, Aveeno Baby and Desitin. I'm Michaela Birmingham from Scary Mommy, and as the mom of two multiracial girls, this topic is really important to me. As parents, it's our job to talk to our kids about race and bias from the start. In fact, the years up to age 5 are crucial in building behavioral and cognitive foundations. Tonight's virtual town hall will include a panel of child development experts who will help us lean into discomfort and provide tools to talk about race and bias. Let's meet our guests. We have Katelyn Williams, a nationally certified licensed school counselor with a focus on parent education, specifically empowering parents to confidently care for and support their child's development. She will help us understand just what our little geniuses are capable of understanding and knowing from birth to age 5. Thank you for being here, Katelyn.
Great to be here.
Dr. Jennifer Harvey is a professor of religion at Drake University whose work focuses on the intersection of race, ethics, gender, politics, and spirituality. She is going to help us identify moments of discomfort and how to work through these confidently by having courageous conversations with our children. Thank you, Jennifer, for being here.
Thanks for having me.
And Andrew Grant Thomas, co-founder of EmbraceRace, a national nonprofit that supports parents, teachers, and other adults to raise children who are thoughtful, informed, and brave about race. He will help us understand how we can better apply anti-bias tools and engage in diversity in our own lives and the lives of our children. Welcome, Andrew.
Great to be here, Michaela.
Thank you to you all for being here to answer our questions and provide well-researched advice and help put our minds at ease. Let's jump right in and start with our first topic, getting to know our kids. So issues of race, racism, and bias are all around us. And some of us have learned the hard way that our kids definitely recognize differences between themselves and others. Now, while we may think our 3-year-old is too young to understand these concepts, they actually can. Isn't that right, Katelyn?
Absolutely.
So we've all had that moment when our kid blurts out something that embarrasses us. Kids are great at identifying patterns and categories at this age to help them make sense of the world. Here's a video of a group of children doing just that. Let's take a look.
Do you know what racism means?
Racism means, I don't know.
Sometimes when he would see white women, he would kind of like, ah! Oh shoot, no, son, it's fine.
What color are your eyes?
Brown,
What color is your hair?
yellow,
What color is your skin?
blue,
We were at the airport and he just said, "That man is black."
What color is your skin?
you say, Mom.
What we like? We liked using beige.
Beige,
What color are you?
brown, and white.
He said to me, "I don't want to be in line with the black man." I was caught off guard and embarrassed, and I said, "You are black."
If I got an ice cream and you didn't, is that fair?
No.
What color is the goldfish?
Orange,
What color are you?
red, green.
If you got an ice cream and I didn't, is that fair?
Yes.
He asked me if white people had brown poop. Do you remember that?
Yes.
You want to do a take 2 on that one?
What color is your best friend?
Brown and red.
Do you have any friends that are different colors?
Nana Mia.
Is it better if most of your friends look like you?
It doesn't matter.
Do you love all your friends?
Yeah.
So look at all those beautiful children, Katelyn. Let's drill down into what our kids are actually seeing and processing. So tell us, when do kids start to recognize race and what do they understand about it?
It's really interesting because for years, parents have thought that babies and even older elementary school kids were these kind of colorblind blank slates. And it's because textbooks didn't talk about it and the research wasn't really talking about it. But now we understand that they really can see and understand a lot more than we think at really early ages. It's a basic survival skill for them to categorize, to see what makes sense, to see what fits where, what's safe, what's unsafe, what's good, what's bad. We want them to do those things. So here's how that applies to race. So children about 2 months old can start to recognize the faces of their caregivers. Those are the people that they immediately associate with safety as long as they've been properly cared for. When they get to 3 and 4 months old, they start watching faces really closely because their eyes clear up and they can finally see and they can recognize familiar faces from a distance. And this is the earliest study that we found that shows 3 months olds can. There was a study done that 3-month-old babies preferred the faces of those within their race to those outside of their race. And the research for this specific type of racial bias increases when babies get to 6 and 9 months old. So does this mean that babies are racist from a very young age? Absolutely not. It just means that babies feel safer when they are around people that look like their primary caregivers, which most often look like them. They are associating safety with the familiar, and people of other races are unfamiliar at this point. So when babies get to 12 and 18 months old, we see them start to point. And this is does a lot of things for them developmentally, but it also helps them with shared attention. They want you to notice what they're noticing. And so they will point out things like racial differences that they can't verbalize yet, but we can tell that they're seeing it. So kids get to 2 and 3 years old and they're able to start using race to explain why people have differences. I do this because I am brown. I do this because I am tan. And then when kids get to 3 and 5 years of age, they can really start to use race as a way to include or exclude their friends. I remember this happening to me in preschool. And this is really important because at this specific time, about 4 years old, kids really can grasp the difference between same and different. And if we're not careful and we don't make some time to intentionally explain these things to them, different can mean scary or bad. So young children don't really have a full idea or understanding of bias, but they can exhibit those behaviors.
So you mentioned this notion of, sometimes people infer that their kids are colorblind at a young age. Can you break down for us what is wrong with saying we don't see color in our family? How is that a problematic way to think about the world?
Sure. So I did a workshop through a parent coaching company that I work with called Weldon, and this question came up. And the biggest way that I like to address it is, well, first of all, when you think about it, it's just not true. If we've done all this research to say that we notice differences between us and other people at a very young age, the ability to notice that doesn't just go away at any age. So we want to make sure that we're being truthful. What people really mean when they're saying that is, I'm not going to acknowledge the color of another person right now in this situation. When you think about it, that's not really helpful. When you're not acknowledging someone's color, you're not acknowledging their experiences, their lifestyle, and everything that they've been through. You're saying that it's not relevant. And so that's not helpful in any situation. We also should stay away from things like skin color doesn't matter or we're all the same on the inside, because they serve the same purpose. Because when you think about it, only certain people have the privilege to say that they don't see color. I have a lived experience that would never allow me to say that because I live in this skin and this color every day. And so it's important to understand that only certain people have the type of privilege that allows that to happen. So something we could say instead, something that's more helpful would be, I see everyone for who they are and I accept them that way.
That is really helpful. So at what age can families start to engage in being anti-racist with their children? Because I think sometimes we might think, oh, they're too young, we're gonna wait till they're older and maybe we'll go to a march or a protest and, they're too innocent right now. But is that really the case?
No, the research shows us that they understand so much that we should really start as early as possible. Whenever parents ask me that question, I always say now. As soon as you're asking the question, now. If you haven't done it yet, start immediately, as early as you can.
No time like the present. I like that. Okay, so now we're going to take some questions from our audience. So these are questions from real parents who are thinking and struggling with a lot of these issues. So this person asks, my child is 5. How can I undo what has already taken hold in terms of racial bias? Is it too late?
That's an incredible question. And the answer is it's never too late. But I always tell people that even though we have this research saying it's best to start these conversations as early as possible, it's never too late. Even if your child isn't asking the questions about it, it would be really easy to say, oh, I've missed my window, I'll just wait until later, but it's just not true. The research also shows us that children of all ages are really responsive to modeling and exposure. So modeling is you. You are the model for your child. So everything that you act out, everything that you have conversations about, they are watching you. And exposure is everything in the world around them right now. So making sure that they are hearing you have conversations about this, making sure that they are exposed to media with people of color as main characters, making sure that you diversify the people that they are exposed to. Sometimes it would feel like a lot of work and a really daunting, impossible task to try to undo everything that's already been done. I like to view it as fighting for what you want them to know instead of fighting against everything else.
That's a great way to put it. I like that. Thank you for those tangible tips. I like that you gave us age ranges. You kept it real for us. We know that even babies are aware of these issues. Thank you so much. So we're going to get ready now for our next topic. If we want to raise good citizens, race is something that we are going to need to get comfortable talking about. As Katelyn just mentioned, we are the models, and we have to be ready to turn those moments that catch us off guard into teachable ones. Dr. Harvey, let's go to you now. Dr. Harvey, is it universal? Is discomfort universal when talking about race?
Yes, race is difficult in the United States, and so there's a lot of discomfort that comes with it.
And speaking of the United States, many parents out there right now are feeling and asking questions around common themes that may also be on your mind if you're watching tonight. So here's a video that you might relate to. Let's take a look.
My parents never talked about race with me growing up. Being mixed and biracial, it definitely had an effect on me.
What makes me the most nervous is saying something incorrectly or just screwing it up somehow, not meaning to.
Screwing up somehow.
Sometimes I don't know how much should I share because I don't want to bring all my baggage.
What makes me the most nervous about having a race conversation with my child? It will instill probably some fear or some self-consciousness, and I hate that I have to give my young child who's so innocent something that's fearful or to watch out for.
For him to understand that not everyone's nice to one another, I think it'll
be hard on us to know that he now knows that.
And I hope also that they don't ever lose their sense of self when we have these conversations. I want them to continue to just feel confident in who they are, even as they get older and understand the dynamics of race more and more.
It is a conversation that we have to think about, and especially because he's a Black boy.
The reality is I will never be able to fully understand the experience of people of color and especially Black people in America. I'm a little bit nervous about just that I'm not enough, but I guess that's also motherhood in a nutshell.
I have to get comfortable with the fact that I'm not gonna have all the answers for my kids. That makes me the most nervous.
I think you can have the greatest intentions as parents, but it gets messy and sloppy along the way. There's always something more to learn. Discomfort leads to growth, so that's what a lot of this has to be.
So I think that last father said it so well. It's messy and there's so much to learn. So Dr. Harvey, let's talk about specific examples. When there's a comment made or a question asked about race, often as parents, we recognize an uneasy feeling in ourselves right away. Some might call that an ouch moment where you're like, ooh, that didn't land well. So one approach, if you're a parent and you're stressed and you're in line at the grocery store, is to ignore and change the subject and move on with your day. Not going to judge, but maybe we've all done that at some point. The other, more difficult option is to talk about it. So Dr. Harvey, how can you guide us with some language that can help us start that uncomfortable conversation, even if we're in the grocery store? Instead of ignoring it and sweeping it under the rug, how can we use the words to actually unpack that statement and start the conversation?
Well, I think that one of the things we need to remember is that, as Katelyn said in the prior segment, we're constantly modeling. And so one of the things we can say to our kids, if it's after the moment, for example, is something like, hey, I heard you say this thing, and I really want to know more about what you were thinking, and just start a conversation. I think it's really important that we remember that adults, and it tends to be even more true, I think, for white US Americans, we bring a lot of anxiety to conversations about race. And I need to remember, okay, I don't need to impose the anxiety on my child. I need to explore with them with open-ended questions and signal to them that this is an important conversation. There's things that I want to learn about what they're thinking, and always doing that because what I want to do is be proactively helping my child learn and think about race in the ways that I want to reflect our family's values of anti-racism. And so we need to just take a deep breath and say, hey, could I talk to you about this thing that I overheard?
Right, because some of us were raised in homes where you don't talk about these things at all. It's rude, or it's bad manners, or, that's it. So let's say you're in an elevator and you have that record scratch moment where you're like, ooh.
Yes.
Do you address it right away in the elevator, or do you, tell your kid to button it and have the conversation later at home in private? What's the best approach?
Well, I think the best approach, and this might even be true in that really stressful, crowded grocery line, is if my child has said or done something that potentially has harmed another person, even if it was innocent, right? They point at a person and say, hey, that person, why is their skin brown? I want to, in that moment, acknowledge that person because I'm modeling for my child that that's an important thing to do when we are out and about in the world and say or do things that might cause harm or be disrespectful. And so I want to say something in the moment like, hey, yes, that person does have beautiful dark brown skin. And honey, it's not polite to point. And I'm also going to try, if they're willing to make eye contact with that person and apologize. Say, hey, something like, I don't know if that made you uncomfortable, but I apologize. And so my child sees me also show regard to the person that I want to acknowledge in that moment. So I think in the moment is really important as often as we can do it. Also knowing though that we don't know how that person might respond and we can't really control that, but we can control how we conduct ourselves around these kinds of encounters out in the world. It will get messy and we need to take a deep breath and be willing to move into the mess with our kids.
Okay, that's a great pointer for parents. We're going to address it right away in the moment. And then maybe I imagine that later that night and during bath time or something, you could bring it up again and say, hey, remember what happened today in the elevator? Do you have any questions or do you want to talk a little more about that? Would that be a good strategy to address it later and check in?
Absolutely, Michaela, because the other thing I think is really important to remind parents, and this has helped me a lot when I feel nervous and uncomfortable. When my child says or does something that I feel sort of raises my blood pressure a little bit, what I want to tell myself is, oh my goodness, I'm so glad I just got information about what my child is thinking, how they're interpreting the world. I want, and especially again in white families where silence has been so prevalent when it comes to race and racism, I want my child to constantly be telling me what they're thinking, what they're wondering, because I don't want them taking that to the playground thinking, oh, I can't talk about this with my mom, so I'm going to learn from my friends. No, I want my child to always be willing and able to sort of know I'm an askable adult. And so instead of freaking out, I want to go, wow, I got important information. And I want to sort of make sure I do a good job circling back and using that information to keep growing the values that I want my child to live into in the world, values that I'm hopefully also modeling myself.
So what I think you're saying is that little hair that stands up on the back of your neck, the ouch feeling, is actually a gift. It's actually telling you, hey, this is a chance for us to talk about this and learn and take this moment and change it for the future.
Yes, I think we could reframe it as a gift that would help us lean into it more fully. And maybe next time our hair won't rise as much. We also get better at it when we do it. The discomfort doesn't always stay at level 10. The more we do it, the more our discomfort level comes down.
Like waxing. The more you do it, it's not as bad the next time, right?
That's
Exactly. I like that. I think that's something that's, again, a tangible tip for parents. The first time is rough. You have to lean in, even though it's hard, but then you have that conversation. And to your point, I think every parent would want to be looked at by their child as the one that they can come to with questions or one that they can have these conversations with and feel, open and free to share whatever's on their mind.
Absolutely.
So we have some really great questions on this topic from our audience that I want to share with you now. Several of them all were around this theme of how soon should parents begin discussing race with a child? Should we be treating these conversations as any other developmental milestone like talking and walking? I think this is a great one because, with young kids, we're like, Instagramming, sitting up now, rolling over, saying the first word, doing all the things, but we may have left out a really important milestone in terms of these conversations about race and bias. Mm-hmm. What do you think?
Absolutely. The moment our children draw air in the world and begin to breathe, they are making sense out of the world, as we heard from Katelyn Williams earlier. So immediately, diverse toys, books, media, dolls, all the things, and ongoing conversation about those things immediately, noticing that difference exists and it's beautiful. We embrace difference. We talk about difference. That's something we want to learn about. That kind of immediate conversation with our children, even before they have words, there's no time that is too early, because then by the time they start to have words, we'll already be well along into a race-conscious conversation with our children that will so much more build that foundation for us continuing to be an askable parent around what begins to happen as they go out into the world more and more and navigate racial landscapes in the United States.
So to put it another way, maybe as parents, this should be the way we do business all the time. Not like one day a month we're going to have a sit down at the dinner table and everyone's going to be stressed and that hair is going to be standing up. We're just going to be the house that talks about this all the time, as often as we have to.
All the time. And sometimes the best thing we can do is say even, hey, that conversation we had 2 weeks ago? I wish I had thought to give you this example and actually show that we are learning as we continue a conversation with our children, modeling that humility and that curiosity and that interest in ongoing learning and development of our ability to talk about race, I think is really important in our families too.
And so that leads me to our next question. We've talked about, if your child says something that doesn't land well, how to address it. Now, how do you address racist comments made by others around your child?
Okay, so deep breath, again, especially for families that are multiracial or white families. We know our children are going to hear racist comments, sometimes even family members. I deeply believe we need to model for our children what we want them to do in terms of living their values in the world, which means engaging cousin whoever or grandma or grandpa and saying, hey, I'm really uncomfortable with what you just said. I feel like it was making stereotype false assumptions about a group of people. And could we talk about this a little bit? Just that kind of intervention models for our child, even if they're very young. We need to engage folks when they say things that are harmful and perpetuate stereotypes about groups of people that aren't true and that out in the world can cause all kinds of harm and maybe even violence. And so this can be really difficult, I know, for families, because it might mean we get into conflicts that we're not sure we're going to have the right words for. I just really encourage parents to remember we are teaching our children what we want them to do by what we do. And we don't always have to have all of the right answers, even in a hard moment with another adult. We just have to be willing to say, hey, I was uncomfortable what you just said. It seemed like, and be willing to at least interrupt the conversation and mark it. And our kids learn a tremendous amount from that, including moral courage to work for a better world for all of us.
That is such a great point, because I think many of us have the aunt or the uncle or the mother-in-law who's maybe saying some stuff that you don't want your child to be hearing, right? And so you're saying that interruption is actually teaching your child, the correct response. And there's respectful dialogue that you have with that other adult is actually teaching your child a lot of helpful information.
Yes, because it's also more than we just don't want them to hear those things. Sure, I don't want my children to hear those things. But I also know they're going to hear them out in the world when I'm not there. And so I also want them to have had an experience watching someone who's, who they trust, modeling, like, when you do hear them, though, here's some things you might try.
I'm going to record you and just have you like in my back pocket. So I can just be like, listen to Dr. Harvey right now, please. Thank you, Aunt. Okay, great. So thank you so much. We're going to move on now to our next segment. So we've tackled some of the questions of how our kids' brains and their sense of the world is developing and touched on dealing with our discomfort of racial discussions. Now it's time to talk about both embracing and celebrating diversity. Let's bring in Andrew. Andrew, we're so glad you're here tonight to talk about the topic of diversity.
Great to be with you, Michaela.
So, let's hear from some families now and their kids about how they have tried to tackle ideas and strategies to embrace and celebrate diversity. Let's take a look.
I think we could all use like just more exposure to differences in our lives.
I mean, in general, I think we need more diversity all across the board.
There have been moments where I've looked up and gone, oh my goodness, everyone here looks just like me.
I never thought to myself, I need to go get another Indian friend or a black friend. But there was something a little bit more magnetic about somebody that was a little bit different too.
The neighborhood I live in is not very diverse, so I've had to make it an active part of my everyday life to seek out diversity.
People are used to living within their tribe that's similar to them. And there is a second thought you have to do to expand that.
I joined a women's collective that was for women of color and their allies.
We try to expose Jack to different cultures in kind of whatever way sort of meets him where he is.
It's not just the people, but it's also surroundings that I think kids need that help enrich their culture, their lives.
Different restaurants, different artistic shows, different festivals, just to show them like the world is bigger than you.
We are such an incredible blend of so many different cultures. We try to instill that in our children, that you can be a mix of cultures.
My favorite thing about our culture is our togetherness, the way that we always are resilient.
One of the things I love most about Jewish culture is we teach a lot about gratitude. We teach a lot about perspective.
Black people just have sauce, flavor.
Dance, rock music, jazz.
I love our culture.
We kind of define our culture by just our local community.
We do everything exceptionally well in spite of all the obstacles that have come our way.
Recipes that have been passed down. My grandma's recipe for matzo ball soup.
We have Shabbat dinners now.
We're gonna have a turkey for Thanksgiving.
On the other side, my dad makes some great enchiladas.
Collard greens, macaroni and cheese.
I had 2 or 3 very close friends that were Catholic, and they've been to more bar and bat mitzvahs.
We're pretty traditional. We like fireworks for 4th of July. Mommy and Daddy are gonna have a beer.
I've been to my first Christmas parties, and that was fun and exciting, and get to see part of like who they are. And I hope that for my kids.
People have different cultures, and they have certain things about them that make them unique. At the end of the day, they're still human beings, and we're very complex people. At least I am.
All right, so we're back with my friend Andrew Grant Thomas to talk about the issue of diversity. So we just saw that in this video, parents who are out there and they're doing some self-reflection on the experiences they themselves and their families are having. So Andrew, what is a sign that we may need to make more of an effort to embrace the diversity around us in meaningful ways? If you're a parent and you're thinking, let's do a kind of self-evaluation, if you will. And in doing so, I wonder if you can explain for us the concept of thick and thin relationships and why this distinction is important.
It's a great question, Michaela. So, the place I would start with that is thinking about why diversity, right? Why diversity matters to us. For me, certainly, first, there is diversity as a value in itself, right? It's an end in itself. So I love to eat, right? And many, many of us do love to eat different foods, expose ourselves to different things, different kinds of music, cultural forms, dance, etc. We enjoy that, right? It's interesting, it's fascinating, we feel good about doing that. And then that doesn't require more than really fairly thin relationships, meaning not that they're trivial or not meaningful, but they're not necessarily layered, right? We're not talking about necessarily about complicated, about friendships, about people we really get to know and have deep relationships with. Then there is what I call thick relationships, which are again those more layered relationships. Diversity to me, maybe the most significant value of diversity for me is that it gives us opportunity to develop those thicker relationships, right? Those are the relationships I think we need if we are to really get to understand each other, to know our histories, to know each other's stories, which is in turn what's required if we're to, expand our understanding of who we are, right? When I think about who the we that I include myself in is, it can be smaller or larger. And I think it's that more robust, wider sense of we that's needed if we're really to be all that we can be, especially in a country, as we know, that has become more and more diverse. So when I think about then, so the question of what signs in children tell you that you need to do more work, it's really those things that show that, that aren't yet that the child isn't yet in alignment with that vision of what diversity is meant to serve, the purposes diversity is meant to serve. So it could be any number of things. I think about, children who only have friends who look like them, right? Or who think that they can only have friends who look like them. I think about children who, who think, we mentioned the store at the beginning, who see the Asian American man at the store and think that he looks exactly like the one Asian American in their church. You think about the Chicano young person who thinks that, she can't be Chicano because she doesn't speak Spanish. You think about and these are all real examples that have, that come to mind that I've been told about recently. You think about the child who thinks that a black girl at school can't be a princess because of the way, her hair looks. So, and I want to say, be very careful to say, if anything like this, right, is true of your child, if you've heard your child say things, Jen Harvey spoke to this earlier, this isn't a thing to freak out about, right? We teach our children to say please and thank you. If your 3 or 4-year-old isn't saying please and thank you consistently, that's not unusual. It just means we have more work to do.
That's a great way to think about it. So it's not a judgment on your parenting. It's, again, as Jennifer alluded to, it's more of a gift. It's an opportunity for you to lean in and challenge yourself and your family to have more of these thick relationships. Yeah. So what about, let's talk about schools, for example, or clubs or daycares that have theme days that showcase food and cultural from various backgrounds. How do we distinguish between cultural appropriation and meaningful cross-cultural sharing? I wonder if you could help us kind of navigate that.
Another great question. So to me, the distinction, the key words in making that distinction are really care and consent, right? So, and I should say that this is, I think the issue of cultural appropriation versus cultural appreciation or cultural sharing, these are difficult. I think there's a lot of gray area here, and I've certainly found myself in circumstances when, where it wasn't clear to me, right, whether or not the line had been crossed. But broadly speaking, certainly, I think...
Andrew, you're telling me it's not clear to you. How are we regular folks out here supposed to navigate? This is not easy.
Right? I know. It's not easy. The point is not to be perfect. And again, this came through both in what Katelyn had to say and in what Jen had to say. The point isn't to be perfect. I don't even know what perfection would look like. It's to know, is to learn and to do the best we can and to hold ourselves accountable for doing that. So... I think of a good friend of mine, white woman born in this country. Most of her family, her ancestors came from France, right? That's where she traces her roots to. She married a man, South Asian man, whose parents are Hindu, grew up in India. And when they got married, invited her into a ceremony that had deep roots in not only their religion, but the part of India that they came from. She was invited into that, right? That's the consent part. That is sharing, right? So it was, I believe, a 3-day ceremony, very ornate, right? All kinds of ritual. Apparently it was lovely. That's sharing. You can easily imagine that if she had, or someone else, if a couple got married who had no connections whatsoever, right, to the religion, to the region, to the tradition, to the culture, no understanding of the history, not only would they not have had consent to participate in such a ceremony, but we might also question the caring part, right? The understanding, the appreciation of the meaning that those rituals, those ceremonies, that dress has for the people who call it their culture. So that's the main distinction I would make.
That's a great way of putting it, consent and caring. So in thinking about this, is there a workload, let's call it, associated with doing the work to really embrace and celebrate diversity? As parents, how do we think about, what mindset do we need to start establishing these thick relationships? Is it just going to happen because we live in New York City and it's a very diverse neighborhood and, it'll just osmosis come through? Or is there more of a actual tangible workload and an effort involved?
Definitely it's work. It's definitely work. It's work even if you live in New York City and in a very diverse neighborhood. And of course, lots of people don't. In this country. This country has been and remains marked by segregation, not only in terms of where we live, but also in terms of our children and where they go to school in many, many cases, and perhaps most importantly, in terms of our social networks. So no, there are many neighborhoods, including diverse neighborhoods, where really that diversity stops at the front door, right? So who do we have over for dinner? Who's in our social circles? Who are our friends? And whom do our children see? Understand our friends to be, and what does that mean to say friends and social circles? It means who are the people that we love and admire and respect and care for and want to spend time with? Who is the we, right? That it perhaps extends beyond our family, and in turn, who loves us? Who cares for us? So no, it's work. I mean, the fact of segregation and separation in our country tells you that it's not easy to do. And as I said before, diversity, I think, certainly for me, is largely an opportunity, right, to do this work. It's sort of a gatekeeper. It's a necessary but not sufficient, right? Without diversity, it's very hard, or it's certainly much harder to make those connections across race, class, culture. With diversity, you still need to do work, of course, to develop those thick relationships.
To get there. So that's a great segue into one of the questions from our audience, because you mentioned, many parts of the country, diversity is not something that you see out your window, right? This question comes from someone who lives in a rural white farming area. They say, our interaction with non-white people is rare. How do I teach my 3.5-year-old that the people she hears and sees that aren't white are weird because they are not the same as her? So, how can they begin to address these issues where, most of the people they're interacting with are looking like them in a rural white farming area?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, this, again, in this case, it's a rural white farming area, and there are many, many places, though, again, many contexts where people face sort of the same predicament of just not a lot of diversity there. So I think my general response would apply to many of those other situations as well. And really, the starting point for me would be to talk with your child about the value that you place on diversity. So even if there isn't a lot there, first we have to understand what do we mean by diversity and why is it so important to us, right? I'd actually have that conversation. There's some great recent research actually out of New York University, according to which children who thought that their parents wanted them to be friends with kids who didn't look like them were in fact more likely to pursue such friendships and less likely to be biased, right, against racial others. So just the signal that you send your child in saying this is important matters. Second, of course, as Jen was so good to underline, it's not enough simply to say, right? And both Jen and Katelyn talked about the importance of modeling. So the question would come up, I think, for your child, okay, if diversity is so important, why are we here? Why are we in a place that's more diverse? Talk about that, right? Talk about that. Talk about why the place isn't diverse. Talk about the choice you made, if indeed you made a choice to come there. And again, talk about how you feel about that. And then in terms of what you can actually do, again, in this internet age, in this age of social media, there are more and more possibilities, right? Certainly there are books, of course, and movies, pen pals. There are some very reputable pen pal organizations that make it possible for our children to connect and connect safely, which of course is important. Appreciate that, the choice is, many, not all of us certainly, but have choices about where we live and where we send our children to school. So exercise those choices, right, thoughtfully as possible. Again, it's not about being perfect. It is about doing the best you can.
Doing the best you can. I think that's so great. Thank you, Andrew Grant Thomas, for those strategies. I think the key takeaway there is that our children are watching, and we have to do our job as parents to be modeling that behavior.
Absolutely.
We have certainly covered a lot of ground tonight. I hope you are all feeling a bit more informed and ready to start getting more comfortable with discomfort when having ongoing conversations with your kids about race. Keep an eye out for more great content on this topic coming to you early next year and made possible by our partnership with Johnson's, Aveeno Baby and Desitin. Once again, a huge thank you to our experts, Katelyn Williams, Dr. Jennifer Harvey, and Andrew Grant Thomas for their time and truly valuable thoughts. And thanks to the families and kids that participated and shared their experiences with us. And thank you to you for joining us. It's crucial that we begin and continue to have conversations with our kids about race and bias from the start. Good night.